Okay, I'm so happy to have an opportunity to talk about the most important thing in some ways. It's our children are everything to us. The crazy amount of love and devotion that we have to them is astonishing to me whenever I think about it. I remember when I had one child. I'm blessed with 7 children. When my first was born, I was very attached to her. We have the same birthday, same Jewish birthday, and she's just my kid. I love her like crazy. And then we find out we're expecting a second one, and I was genuinely perplexed. How could it be that there'll be another kid who could be anywhere near how much I love this kid? And then just somehow, I don't know how it works, but your heart expands. I don't know what it is. The crazy level of love that we have for our children. I want to tell you something sort of by way of introduction, but I want to be exceedingly practical because I think that that's something that we need. We need just real examples and real. I'm not making anything up. The first thing I'm telling you is I'm not making anything up. Some things I've seen from trial and error, but for the most part, I'm telling you things that I've read, that I've come to understand from real sources that are reliable. But don't believe anything I say. If something doesn't sound right to you or it doesn't make sense, then disagree. Then I'm wrong. It may be that you didn't understand me. We don't educate our children based on something we heard from someone else that makes no sense to us and doesn't work. So there may be 2 different approaches. I'm hoping that, as our sages say in Maseches Sota, Daf Yod, Nikarin Divrei Emes. When something is emet, when something is true, it's nicker. You can recognize it. You can see it. And so the hope is that that's what we'll be able to share. But none of this is original. So I just want to start with this. It's by way of introduction, but I think it's such a significant thing to always remember. So you have a little boy, right? You have a little boy who's 6 years old, and he's got a big sister, and she thinks he's the most wonderful little brother. And the parents, when he runs, he's the fastest runner ever. Did you see little Dovey run? He's the fastest little guy. And then he's cute. And everything he says, if he burps, everyone giggles because it's so sweet right? This is his experience. And now he goes off to school. In school, his Rebbe doesn't think that. His Rebbe thinks this is an obnoxious kid, let's say. I mean, not all rabbis are evil, but, right? The kids, you ever met an obnoxious kid? I mean, there are not your own kid, that other one's kid, right? Sometimes there's a kid who just gets on your nerves, and his friends decide, I don't know, like, maybe he's a little bit of a loser, right? Like, this kid is not cool, he doesn't have the right lunchbox, or whatever the thing is. And this kid gets on other people's nerves. To the parents, this is the sweetest, most precious, most perfect kid in the world. He's just wonderful. And this is how it goes. I mean, when you ever hear somebody telling you a story about how cute their kid is, but you're not related to them? So like, my daughter doesn't say ambulance, she says ambience. And to the family, it is the sweetest thing in the whole world. And to you, it's just not a story. Like, because do you understand this? So who's right here? Is the Rebbe right that kid is just kind of obnoxious and difficult? Or is the parent right that this is the most precious, beautiful, holy, special soul that's probably ever come to the planet? At first glance, you would think, like, everyone else in the world is right at noticing what a brat and how obnoxious this kid is. But that's not true. Because when we want to know what's right, the question always is, what does God think? And to Hashem, remember I told you, when I had one kid, I couldn't imagine loving 2. Well, it's easier for you, right? I mean, to imagine, if you have 2 children, you can imagine that you can love one and another one. For Hashem, it's easier to love 10 billion people. It's easier to understand how an infinite God can love 10 billion with that level of love than one person to love 2 people like that, 2 children like that. Because God is infinite. And when he looks at this little Jewish boy or this little Jewish girl, they are the sweetest, most precious, most beloved being in the world. Now, what about the other one? Yeah, also that one. Okay, but that level of love, parents are just gifted, hopefully, with such intense, magnificent love for their children that they get to see them a little bit like the way Hashem does. There's 3 partners here. There's Hashem, the Father, and the Mother, and hopefully a person is given that amazing gift, and usually that's the case with normal, healthy people, we love them like crazy, and we see the good in them, and that also means that what happens when that kid shows chutzpah? I mean, they're 4 years old, and they're not listening. How are they going to be married one day? How are they going to live a good life, right? In other words, the level of concern that we can have can be magnified. They're everything to us. So it's important for us to understand this is the greatest possible gift that we have because it's the truth. And children need to know that. They need to grow up believing they are the most precious, that they really matter. Every adult in the world will say that somebody hurt my feelings. It's a terrible thing. You know what my ex-boyfriend did to me? Do you know what my boss said? You know what made you think your feelings matter at all? They don't matter. You're an amoeba's feelings matter. And the answer is every human being really, really matters. And you learn that from the youngest age. So that when a baby cries, there are those who have a very strong theory. I know Rabbi Noach Orlowick and others, parents need to always respond in some way. Even if the response is, I see you crying and I care about you and I'm sorry that that's happening, but you're still going to daycare. Goodbye. I love you. I hear you cry. I'm sorry you're sad. Bye. But to just not respond, there are those who have that theory, even for sleep training. Now, I'm not an expert in that at least the parent should be around. Say, I'm here, but you're going to sleep. I'm not coming in. I'm on the other side of the door, but I'm here. So whether or not that's the perfect methodology, I'm not weighing in on. I don't have the expertise. But as a general rule, I'm there for you. I love you. You matter to me. Your feelings matter. That's how a person develops in a very healthy way because it's true. You matter and you're important and you're precious. I try to think about that. I have the privilege to teach in high school, and there are kids that can get under your skin. I mean, teenagers can get under your skin sometimes. And I try to remind myself regularly, like every one of these children is precious to their parents beyond anything. And if something were ever to happen to them, if they were to come home and have a bad day, that hurts their parents. But if they were to get really hurt their whole family would be destroyed. They're so precious and they matter so much. And like the fact that, is this a person I would choose to, they're beautiful. Now the truth is this is true about adults and it's true about human beings. But with children, this is a critical part. So we have to remember, we have this love for them. We have this care for them. Sometimes it can cause us to magnify things way out of proportion. One thing to remember is the other side of the coin, by the way. Once you're thinking about this, everybody else, I would see it at parent-teacher conferences. There was a boys' yeshiva that I used to teach in. As a side note, if anyone ever needs help preparing a Purim spiel, let me know. Okay, anyway, that's an inside joke between me and myself. But there's a yeshiva I used to teach in, and there were 4 rabbeim that would, that's how they did parent-teacher conferences. They put us in like a large room, and then there'd be like 4 different teachers in that room, and parents would come in and meet with different people. So I would see the following thing happen. I would see a parent come in, and the teacher would say, okay, Jeffrey is doing good. A little too much talking in class. And even comments that were said like that, like, he's a good boy, he could probably talk a little bit less. It's a knife in the heart. It hurts those parents so much to hear negative things about their kids. It's usually a bad idea. Unless it's an emergency, in which case you probably should have dealt with those parents months before the conferences, because it was so important. I learned that the most effective thing to do was to find some positive things about this child and just tell the parents that you see them. This child is very creative. They're very generous. They never say a mean word about another. Whatever the thing is, just find something good to say about the child and let the parents know, I see it and I value your child. And the parent will say, he tells me he sometimes goofs during class. What do we do about that? But bringing up when you're dealing with your neighbor's kids or anyone else, you have to be so sensitive to this idea because this is an aside, but it's so important. People do not react well to it, and they're not supposed to react well to it. You're supposed to be on your kid's side. This also means, I'll tell you one more application of this. It is so healthy for a child to know. My daughter came home from school once and said a certain kid hit her. I said, what is their name? So she started to hesitate. So she tells me, I said, I'm coming to school tomorrow, and I'm going to punch them. Nobody is going to hurt my child. So she says, Daddy, you can't. So I said, they hurt you? I'm going to punch them. And now she's talking me down and saying, I don't know if they really meant it. It wasn't just that. In other words, it was a very effective thing. But I did genuinely have frustration with that other kid. I was really upset at them for that moment. You're going to hit my child? I'm upset. That's ridiculous. It's a 4-year-old. What do they know? What are they seeing at home? What's causing it? It's all silly. And my daughter's talking like, maybe they come from an abusive home. Like, you're 5. What are you saying? So it wasn't those words. But you understand? Suddenly they're talking me down. It helped them process it. But as a whole, it's very important. I've seen it when children feel like a teacher's picking on them or something's happening. The parent's job with the child is to demonstrate I'm not okay with that. I'm on your side. It is never our job to turn to the kid and say, well, maybe your teacher had a reason. You're not the defense lawyer for the teacher. You can talk to the teacher like a mensch and say, I'm absolutely certain that my child is blowing things out of proportion because she's a drama queen. But I wanted to bring to your attention, if you think it's necessary. You can handle it another way, but it's very, very important. Just like with your spouse or with anyone you love, they tell you, I have a problem, and you're dismissing it and you're pushing it away. That love we have for them is right. And Hashem gave it to us to use. And it means you're on their side. If somebody hates your kid, then you hate them because that's my kid. And that's the end of the story. Why? It doesn't make a difference. My kid was wrong, so they're wrong. But they're my kid. Now, okay, then you have to be level-headed about how you handle your life. I want to talk about, in that context, since we blow things out of proportion in a healthy way with our children, we're worried about their futures, I want to say that in my understanding, chinuch, education, chinuch, is all 100% about long-term perspective. It's always about long-term perspective. It is never about the moment. That's always a mistake. It's always long-term perspective. What will happen after? So you say, this school has, what do they look like when they come out of 8th grade in that school? Is that the product you want? And if you don't know, go sit there in the lunchroom for a day and just sit and listen, be a fly on the wall. Do you want that or do you want something else? Are you okay with them being a Swiftie? Like, is that the goal? Are you raising them up? What is the goal? Very, very often people will say, this school, I'll give you another example. People will say in this school, I notice this a lot, that people will point out, this school has much better derech eretz. People are more respectful. In the other school, there's kids running the hallways, swinging from the chandelier. It's a little more chaotic. And in this one, they stand up nicely. That's a significant values question. My question is, what do they look like when they come out? Do I meet adults who went to this high school or that high school, right? Well, here they have more, someone once told me about a certain school, well, here they have more this. When I meet people that are 20 years old who went to that high school, I do not find that the ones who went to the Chabad school where it was a little more chaotic are much less kind, or that none of the men can talk to females. I'm not finding that. Even though, right, I'm not finding this problem, in which case long-term perspective is very significant. Now, in the short term, you have to figure out if a kid is getting bullied, if a kid is not fitting in, that's a long-term problem. But it's very important with everything to keep a long-term perspective. The example I gave earlier, which I think is a perfect example of this, is a little child who doesn't want to wash their hands for hamotzi. So it's time for the Shabbat meal, everyone's going to wash, and the kid's shrugging. Right? They do not shrug, and you tell them to do something, and they just stand there. I'm not doing it. So what do you do? What do you do with that kid? There's a couple choices. So one of them is fine, but you're not getting any hamotzi. You're not getting any food until you wash. It's very effective. Starvation is very effective at getting kids to do what you want them to do in the short term. It's also effective at teaching a child to dislike this mitzvah and feel like it's just that it also does that very effectively. Since chinuch is about long term, my thought is when they hit 12, 13, and beyond, are they going to be ready to know how to do this mitzvah and feel comfortable doing it and not have any baggage around just, how hard is it to wash your hands? And it's a mitzvah, and it's how Jews do, and it saved us in the Black Plague, according to a Kiev rabbi I once heard. So it's really, has all kinds of benefits, right? Do we do it or do we not do it? And what the answer is? It depends. If when your child says, I don't want to wash, and you say, that's totally fine, because you're still a kid, and that's not really, when you're bigger, you're still a kid, there's a lot of things you don't have to do. And when they do wash their hands, pick them up in the air and give them a kiss. So I'm so proud of you. You didn't have to. You did. And I'm proud of you. And dance with them. You did a mitzvah. You know what? Good a mitzvah. That kid is going to love Judaism and he's going to love washing his hands. And if he doesn't always do it every time, you're not losing a thing because you're educating. And educating doesn't mean enforcing something when they're little that you can enforce because they're strong. I once read somewhere that they said that a lot of times parents of kids who get a little bigger act as though they're in management. So you're ordering, do this, do that, and they don't realize their job is now sales. Their job is now sales. Management works for little children, but that's not really what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be, as they get a little older and they have opinions, we're in sales now. We want to show them that's a very, very important attitude. It doesn't last otherwise. Yes?
Sometimes parents feel when the kids are enough age, you're not a little kid anymore.
Right.
For 2 years they've been washing their hands already. Now you're 9.
It's true. It's true. And there is a concept of certain basic standards, especially when it's something that developmentally the child can understand. So as an example, if a family were to say, it's appropriate for you to say thank you to your mother after dinner. Let's say that's something. They say it's appropriate. Your child should say thank you. Somebody cooked you a whole meal, you say thank you. Or everybody has to clear off something from the table. You're part of a family, and that's an appropriate thing. And a child is old enough to understand that well. When it's not in the moment and they're, right, you can have a conversation with them where they see, like, yeah, it's a lot of work. Why should your mother have to just clear off everything? Or your father, right? Yeah, right. But in theory, right? In other words, everybody should participate. So if the child's old enough to understand that, then it's fair to hold them to a level of responsibility that they can handle, right? And we'll talk about how to do that. But what does the child know about washing? Do you know why we wash hands? I heard it's like the Kohan. I mean, like, I don't know why we do it. Is it Doraisa? Is it Abundant? Where does it come from? Why should I do it? Why is it so important? This is complex. And it's a mitzvah. It's not something that as the child's developing, if they grow up to not have any gratitude at 7, 8, 9 years old, that'd be strange. They're not happy when somebody comes and gives them a present. Wow, I like it. Thank you. Like, that's very healthy. So that's the first thing. Yeah, that's the first thing. In other words, it depends what mitzvah it is and what's going on. However, to begin with, so we have this problem that the kids don't listen to anything they say. Do you ever have this problem? You say it's time to take a bath, and like the kid is just not going to the bath. So what you say is, okay, so some people start like this, okay, 5 minutes till bath time. And the kid, okay, 15 minutes later, right? You finish whatever, you put down the phone. Okay, it's time, 1 more minute, let's go. And they still don't do a thing. And finally, after like the 5th time, like, good sweet Lord, didn't I tell, right? And like the kid goes, hightails it straight into the bath. Right? You have this, right? So why did they not listen the first 5 times that you told them to go in the bath? I'll tell you why. Because you didn't mean a word of it. When you mean it, they know they have to go. You didn't mean it. You were like doing this thing where you say this, you say that, you say that. So you told them something and they realize they don't have to listen, so they don't listen. And then when you finally mean it, they always go. So here's the trick. This is a real thing. And sometimes it takes a little bit of learning if we haven't been doing it yet. Only say things you mean. Don't say anything you don't mean, and don't give any instructions that a person won't listen to. So, for example, you tell a child, go get me a tissue. You have 2 choices now, quickly. You could call back and say, actually, I don't need the tissue, never mind. If you see them, and if you could, if they don't realize, then that's fine. Otherwise, you really only have 2 choices. You either have to like take their hand and go get the tissue, and make them do it, if that's appropriate, or you have to make it clear that there's a simple consequence. Look, Daddy, Mommy told you to get the tissue, and if you don't do that, then here's what's going to happen, and then that's the whole thing. That's the whole story. But it has to be a consequence that's enough that like the next time or the 3rd time they'll think about it twice, because they'll learn that like that's. But the main thing is not so much the consequence. It's that they know you meant it. It doesn't have to be a hard consequence. It shouldn't come with any shaming of them. You're evil. You're bad. You didn't listen. And now look how you're a wonderful kid, but like you made a mistake. You didn't listen. Like that's fine. And we'll talk about that more in a second, because that's critical how you frame it. But again, if you only say things you mean, this is a whole different life for everyone. You'll think twice before telling your child to do something if you're not sure that they're going to be able to do it. And then you'll realize, like, wait a minute, why not? If I just tell them to do this and they're not doing it, what's going on? Maybe we should work more on figuring out what's going to make them want to. Like, maybe we should have a conversation in a par of quiet time, that's not the heat of the moment, about it's hard for mommy to do all the work with no help. That's very fair, or whatever the attitude is. But it's very significant. They say over from Reb Scheinberg, Zichrono Livracha, that he said that people's relationship with God and Judaism is directly modeled on Avinu Malkeinu. God is like our father; He's like our mother. It says one of the rabbis in the Gemara, when he would see how his mother would treat him, Rabbi Yosef would come, so he would say, "I stand up for the Shechina." Right? Our relationship to our parents directly relates to how we appreciate Hashem. If you appreciate your parents, if you're grateful that they brought you to this world, Hashem says that's honoring me. If you honor Hashem, honoring Hashem and honoring parents are tremendously linked in the Gemara. The Torah uses the same language. We learn that they're identical character traits. A child who learns to be obedient to fair, loving parents who want what's best, in a way that's healthy and not aggressive and not too much, learns what it means to be, well, then I would trust God. If He says this is the right way to keep Shabbos, or the right way to dress, or the right way to act, I don't know better than Him. I mean, even my parents turned out to be right about, the things that they taught me for the most part. And they're humans and so forth. And he says that the basis of all religious behavior in life is inextricably related to the way that one's parents raise the children. And therefore, we have the capacity to demonstrate this basic idea of structure. And children who grow up without that sort of thing, they're often the way they behave in other society and their rates of imprisonment. There was a number in the book Off the Deck, actually gives a number of the mashgiach in one of the yeshivas for boys who are totally not religious after high school, said that 40% of them came from very, very dysfunctional families. It makes sense. There's a lot of reasons behind it. So one of the things we need to do is create a sense of safety and structure. I remember once, this happened in my shul, in the very early days of my shul. There was a man who was a little bit unusual who came to the shul once in a while. I don't think that he was blessed with all the faculties that all of us have, and that's, you try to be kind to him. But he came to shul for, Shal Shudas and Ma'ariv, and after Ma'ariv, I went into the other room to make Havdalah. And that's how we used to do it. Make Havdalah in the other room, and he didn't come. I guess he was davening a longer thing. He came in a few minutes afterwards and started screaming, "Why didn't you wait for me?" So I said to him, very calmly, but I said to him, I didn't know you were waiting. I said, I'm really sorry. If I would have known, I would have waited for you, and I'm happy to make Havdalah for you again. I said, but if you ever speak to me in that tone of voice again, you're not going to be welcome back. And I said it very calmly. And there was a young couple who had walked in that Shabbos afternoon for the first time, who witnessed this conversation. And I was petrified. They're never going to come back. They're going to think I'm just a lunatic and whatever it is. And they joined the shul after that. And a year later, I once had the guts to bring it up. I was I don't know if you caught me in the best moment. I don't know. What did you think about that? And they said, we felt really safe. That's what they said. We felt really safe. We felt that this was with that same exact fellow. He once I had him over for a Shabbos meal, and he plopped himself down in a seat right at the table. He came to the table. So I said to him, actually, so-and-so, you're going to be sitting here because that's my daughter's seat. And he was very upset. He says, who that bleep cares? Whatever it was. It was HE double hockey sticks, it wasn't that extreme, But he says, who the heck, right? And he was upset. And I told him, I said, listen, we enjoy having you over. You're more than welcome here. I said, if you don't get up now and go to the other seat, I'll pack you up food and you're welcome to take it home and eat it. But you can't stay if you're going to. And I felt the courage to say that to him again, and I said, and I'm going to forget this conversation ever. As soon as he said that, I said, okay, I don't even remember how, I'm so happy you're here, and that was the end of it. It was very significant because I wanted my daughter to feel safe. In other words, she has a seat in the house. This is her spot. This is her home. She's hosting guests. She's going to cook for them. She's going to help for them. But this is her spot. In a very significant way, children will feel much safer when the parent is actually in control. Even if the parent is saying, this is what you're going to do now, this is what you have to do. Now, again, we can't be tyrants, we can't constantly be doing it, but there's some things that are appropriate to now it's time for you to go to bed, is a completely appropriate thing. And when they learn that, when you say that, they might be able to, can I have 5 more minutes? Okay, I'm not a tyrant, yes. But that's very, very significant. It makes our lives so much easier. You will discover that you're actually in control. Anger is generally expressed when people feel they've completely lost control. That is a major part of anger. That's why people can do crazy things when they're angry. Break things and all kinds of things and we'll find out where there's no need to lose our tempers significant numbers of time. People who have tried this, myself included, find that this methodology really works. Just say things that you mean, and when you mean them, you can say them calmly, and there's a clear consequence. If not, and now you're in control of things, and the kids will learn. Maybe not in the first time, but they will. This is a very, very significant perspective, and it's very important. Okay, now, we said, how do you do it? So, okay, this is a little bit... I'm going to introduce what I'm going to say with something interesting. It says in the laws of Havdalah in Shulchan Aruch that the Ramah brings that it's a custom to overflow the Havdalah cup. My cup runneth over. He says the reason is because of a Gemara that says, Kol Beis, any home where wine doesn't flow like water is not bichlal bracha. It's not included in blessing. So what does it mean to be blessed financially? To be blessed. It's that you could spill wine like water. It flows freely. What's the big deal? Okay, so that itself, that Gemara itself, is an important lesson about not being too cheap if you can manage it. In other words, just an example, I'm not against people that want to water down the apple juice because they think it's too much sugar for their children. That's completely fine. If that's what you think, if it's about the sugar. They're going to grow up to shovel in sugar. Anyway, nothing you're doing is going to make any difference except possibly fetishize it for them more. But whatever, it's not such a big deal. That I don't have a problem with. But if a person is saying the apple juice I get is like delicious, not from concentrate, simply apple, that's expensive. So for me, I really enjoy it. For my kid, I'm watering it down. It's not the best message. They are your best investment. They're the most important person to you. It's a good thing to be able to, in other words, out of cheapness is not the way to do it, unless a person really is impoverished, in which case they should water it down even more for themselves than for the children. This is a very significant attitude, especially as children get old enough to realize it. Your bichlal bracha, it's blessing. In other words, you matter to me. I care. I'm not cheap on you. There is no spouse. The Rambam says it's one of the basic responsibilities of a husband to his wife is yesh lo mamon marbe betovasa kafi hamamon. If a man makes money, this is the old days, and the man is the breadwinner, right? And the woman is being supported by her husband, and so he has a responsibility. The more money he makes, the more generous he has to be to her. Now I don't understand. When we got married, right? I bought her a really nice Toyota Camry. So now, beautiful, all new, bells and whistles. Now, I could afford a Tesla, but why should I I'll give her a Camry. Like that was because I made more money in business. What's the difference? And the answer is, yeah, that's a basic responsibility. That's the way that you show normal love to a person, is that you're not cheap on that person any more than you would be for yourself. And that's a very significant thing. And so it's also important with our children. So that's one thing you see from there. The Taz is a commentary on the page of Shulchan Aruch from the 1600s. And the Taz says a whole new interpretation of this Gemara. Remember, the Talmud said any house in which wine doesn't spill like water is not included in blessing. So he says that means when a person spills water in the house, I'm just picturing this, I had friends growing up when I was in high school. I remember going to a friend's house in Lawrence, New York, and they had a whole second living room with furniture that no one's allowed to sit on. Have you ever heard such a thing? A whole, like soaps in the bathroom that no one has ever used, and towels, and I come out of the bathroom, those were guest towels. Like, I'm a guest, that type of thing. So, it's an amazing world. So imagine somebody spilling like red wine all over that white couch that's being saved for if the Pope arrives. That's what it's for, right? What would happen to you? Unbelievable. What if a little water spritzed on it? Probably nothing, because it's water. It doesn't cost anything, and it doesn't make much of a mess. It's water. Any home, when they spill wine, they react just like if they spilled water. Yeah, the wine's expensive, and yeah, it stained the couch. And you know what? People make mistakes, whatever. It's like water. It's nothing. That's a home that's bichlal bracha. So I want to tell you what that means. If you have the self-esteem to really mess up and be like, that's okay, I'm still pretty awesome. you're ready for every blessing in the world. Because it's very hard to be married to somebody who has low self-esteem. It's very difficult. Because if you come home 10 minutes late because you stayed late at Mariv talking to a friend, and that is a little thoughtless if your wife was waiting for you, so you probably shouldn't have done that, but you did. But it's like, here's another proof my husband doesn't love me. And I'm telling you, like, people come to the rabbi with a list of 10 things that here's another proof, my husband or my wife, and that's just, no, it's your self-esteem. There was a woman who once told me, that her husband will say these things to her, like that she's beautiful, and that, like, I don't know why he makes fun of me. Like, I know I'm, like, she could not understand that he really meant what he was saying. And I said to her, like, you realize this is not normal, that a person would have such a hard time with compliments. She said, I know, it's unusual. I don't know if I use the word not normal, but I want her to understand that this is atypical, that a person has such a hard time. Where do you think it comes from? And she was able to realize, well, I've always suffered with self-esteem, and so it's very difficult because everything gets interpreted. When your child comes into the house and tracks mud all across the floor that you just washed, does it occur to you, he doesn't love me? He's just a schlemazel. So if your adult husband is an ape who tracked mud across the floor, so he's an ape, but he's your ape. He loves you. What does that have to do with it? Do you understand? How having that is the appropriate response. It's like, and it drives me mad. By the way, you can get angry at your kid for tracking mud. What do you do? I just washed the floor. How do you not notice? And so that kid's going to grow up and be 50 and do the same thing. And if his wife is suddenly saying, what's wrong with this guy? That's just whatever. That's who he is. You understand? Like, that's who he is. He should try to be more sensitive, and it's true. I'm not saying it's okay, but it's nothing to do with whether the person loves you. It has nothing to do with that. A person who has low self-esteem is a very difficult boss. If you ever had one at work, they can't take any criticism. They can't take any suggestions. They're a very difficult employee. It's very hard to manage somebody who cannot take anything that you say, no matter how, I fully agree with everything you're saying because it's brilliant. And I only want to add one thing. And the person's like, why are you so mean to me? I've had conversations like that in my life with people. It's very challenging. If you can have the attitude of, you know what? Yeah, I spilled something, made a mistake. I crashed a car. Yeah, I dented it, but I'm still great. So when your child, that is going to happen. That your teenager is going to get an offender bender at some point. They'll be fine, Bez Hashem, and give a bracha, and be healthy and well, but the car's going to have something, and like, when you look at them, say, like, hey, that's part of life, and you're great, and I love you, and you don't feel bad about this, and maybe the brakes didn't work, whatever it is, you were spaced out, right? That's life. That's the person has to come up with 100 excuses. So it's very significant when we educate children, very significant, that the attitude is, you are fantastic. Also, you did something wrong, that there's a consequence for, there's something else, but you're a great kid. For example, go to your room. You hit your sister, and you're a good boy, and good boys don't hit their sister. So you're going to go to your room for a minute because you're a good boy, and that's not the way you should be behaving. It's a whole different childhood than bad boy. What you did is bad. You are a bad boy. Now go to your room. It's a whole different childhood. It's a whole different experience. It's very, very important for us to make that a very basic part. Anything we're trying to encourage our children to do, and this works 100% of the time, provided, right? It works 100% of the time, except for sometimes. So, right? In other words, in normal situations, it works. If a child is starting to get frustrated, and you say to the child, I see you're getting really frustrated, but I'm proud that you're not hitting anyone or calling any names, even though I see you're getting frustrated. If you'd not said that, it could be the next thing they were going to do is physically assault somebody and call them names. But because you said that, you most of the time that works. The times it doesn't work is when someone's already in a rage and they're already beyond reason. And we all know what that feels like when it's happened to us, right? And that happens to children too. To the point that in the Sefer HaChinuch, it says that even though the Torah says that you're not allowed to take revenge, and if someone hits you, you can't hit back, that's only after some time. But when someone just hits you now and you're in the heat of things, you can't expect a person not to hit back. So when your child's already angry and already upset is no time for education. But the goal would be to make sure that things are expressed consistently. You're a good boy. You're a good girl. And make them believe that about themselves. It's true. They have a soul. They want to do what's right. Everything about them is good. The fact that they have midos that are as of yet unrefined, despite being 7 or 8 years old, is exactly par for the course. And it's like just how they're supposed to be. And it would be alarming. It would be alarming if they were perfectly obedient and just a totally well worked out person at this stage. But having them understand, you're good, and I see that you're good. A child who develops the identity it has to have some bearing on reality. But when they're positive and cheerful, you say, I love how positive and cheerful you are. It makes me happy. They will be more. They will continue to nourish. They'll try to bring out that meter that they have. If they're easygoing, even if they're not always easygoing, but you see them, their sibling wants this seat, and they just say, okay, I'll give you the seat, because this is what kids argue about every Shabbos table, and every time they get in a car, and every time, right? Once there's enough kids to argue about seats, that becomes the entire preoccupation of their life of who sits in this one. It's unbelievable, right? It's like an unbelievable thing. That's how often I hear about this. So the answer has to be like, if you see a kid who's like a little bit willing to give up their seat one time, let them know. Let them know 5 or 10 times that, like, I saw how you're being easygoing, and just not making a big deal out of it. That's a really good meter. That's really special. That's really good. It becomes so worthwhile to highlight these things, because then you have something to work. Because I've seen you doing it. I know you can do it. I know you're good at it. I know sometimes it's hard, but that's who you are. That feels good. Nothing is as valuable for your children ever, or really for any person, as the admiration and appreciation and respect of the people that you love and care about. They once, I think it was in Freakonomics, but it's in one of these, it was somewhere, but the story goes that there was this little boy who in his public elementary school was cleaning up after band practice or something after school. He was like cleaning up the chairs. He would do something like above and beyond. And everyone was really impressed with him. Like, it was a very thoughtful thing to do. It took him a few extra minutes to get out. And at one point, one of the administrators said, we actually have some money in the maintenance budget or something. We could pay him like $5 a day. Wouldn't that be nice? Maybe he even came from a disadvantaged background. Like, I'm not sure what the story is. Anyway, as soon as they started paying him, within a few days, he stopped doing it. He wasn't interested anymore in cleaning them up, because there's another example of this. I think they give the other example was the pickup at the daycare. So pickup at daycare was supposed to be 4:00 or something. You couldn't come late. You had to be there to pick up on time. Otherwise, someone is standing out there waiting for you with your kid, and that's not nice. And they were having a problem that occasionally people were coming late. So they established like $15 or something for up to 20 minutes late, whatever it was. And it skyrocketed how many people came late. Because now if I'm on a call or I'm shopping or I have an appointment or whatever, like, now there's a price to it. So they're like, when it's like, how am I making another person feel? And that worked. Once it was $10, if this was like, okay, so it's $10, I can afford that, or it's expensive for me, but I'll do it because what am I going to do? And you don't have to rush anymore. And so in other words, sometimes when you take a kid, and this I've seen this in schools, sometimes they say davening becomes about the prize they're going to get. You will sometimes have a kid who's just too smart. And they're just like, I don't need that prize. Like, I'll get a prize at home. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that kid. There's nothing wrong with them. What do you do? So I once had that with one of my children. My daughter was very unique because this girl was like the top of her class at everything. This one, like, very academic, very goody-ish, like, but she wouldn't open her mouth during davening in school. So I asked her, like, what's the deal? Her teacher called up and it's like, it's just very puzzling because it doesn't fit and she's like, all the other kids are screaming. I don't like screaming. In other words, it's not that she doesn't like connecting to an infinite creator and pouring out her soul. Like, that's not what kids are doing. Davening is chanting. She doesn't like chanting. So I said, but what about like the chart? She's like, yeah, I don't care about it. Like, that didn't do anything for her. So what I worked with her on is like starting to notice if she would bench at home and she would do any davening. I was like, I see that you really daven nicely. It seems like you say all the words and you take care about it and you're proud of how you daven. So like, it became a thing in our family. Like, so-and-so really likes davening. She just doesn't like when it gets too loud. She likes to daven quietly. She likes to do it herself. And that became a big part of her, to the point that right now, like in high school, her problem is like, she really feels like she doesn't have enough time to daven. And like, teachers have complained to her, like, you really just have to stop this thing. And she's like, but I just wanted to say the whole thing, and I think other kids might be skipping parts of Shemona Esrei because they don't see how they're doing it. So, like, that's like where she's holding now. And I saw how, like, for her identity, and it was right, and it was that when we listen. I should also give like an hour on all the things I got horribly wrong, and like, I don't mean to come across as like some kind of a guru, but that was like an example where the things that I learned I was able to implement with her. So it's very, very important. We need to be able to find an identity for our children that's not being superimposed, but it's coming from who they are. I'm a good boy. I'm a good girl. Now that's true. That's true from the minute they're born, and you should tell them you're a tzaddik, you're a sweetheart. But the more that you can attach it to actual things that they do, so they can take pride in those things. Rewards, when given as a bribe, are deeply counterproductive. In other words, if you do this, I'll do that, is counterproductive for two reasons. First of all, it makes the object of value the prize. So what really matters in life is watching some TV. That's what's the best thing you can possibly ever get. And if I see you learning a Mishnah, I'll let you watch some TV or some baseball highlights or some whatever the thing is. What you've just done is given a false sense of values by accident. Whereas, okay, so that's one problem. The second thing is a lot of times the kid doesn't care. I don't need a Mishnah that bad. It's only worth $5. Like, I don't need $5. Like, what am I going to do with it anyway? My parents basically give me the money I need for things, and right, which is reasonable. Like, there's another solution. I think rewards are very valuable. My friend Rabbi Yaakov Wolbe, who's a podcaster, he's a rabbi, but he has a very, very, very successful Jewish history podcast, among others. Rabbi Wolbe was a chavrusa of mine, his dear friend. So he told me once that one of his best memories was when he was a little boy and he came home from yeshiva. His father was the son of Reb Shlomo Wolbe, so his father's a tremendous educator, son of a very great rabbi. He came home from school and he'd gotten like a really good grade on a Gemara test, something big, maybe it was a final, and he did really well. And he had worked hard for it. His father got this big smile, took him by the hand, and took him into his office and opened his safe, and took out a watch and gave it to him. And he said that was like one of the big moments of his childhood, the way he described it to me. Like, it really, maybe it was just a big moment of my life hearing that story. But this was, in other words, it wasn't if you learn, I'll get you a watch. It's as a token of how much I value and appreciate and respect the thing that you just did. Here's a reward, and that reward paid fruits for years to come. So if a child were to understand, I know there's something you want, it can even be in advance. I know there's something you want, and I want to get it for you, as a demonstration of, if it can be couched in a way, and it truly is, it's, why are you wearing this watch? Because we are so proud of you, and we are so, whatever that is. So it doesn't need to be a surprise. That is a very effective method of rewards. When it comes to little things, if it really works, it's not the end of the world. In other words, it's not so important that they love brushing their teeth. That's not such a basic value. So if you were to say, listen, you brush your teeth for 10 days, you'll get this chart, and then you get a thing, and whatever, like, great. But once we're talking about values, if it's davening, if it's other things, and the solution is going to be, well, I don't want that reward, that's when it becomes very risky. So in other words, I don't say that there's never a time to just reward something with something else. There may be small little things where that's an effective strategy. Okay, but it's very significant because of the meta aspects of it also, that that inner sense of like accomplishment, and I did a good thing, and I did the right thing, is something that is really all they're going to have in life. A person's, sense of integrity. Why should you be honest when no one else is watching? If you're trained from a young age to understand that that's what's valuable, that's what my parents value. I felt the good feeling of doing the right thing when no one else knows about it, and no one else will ever hear about it, and that internal feeling of that's something that we can foster and give our kids in a meaningful way by showing them how we feel about it, and by allowing them to feel that wonderful, amazing feeling when you feel like you've done something good, you've done something right, you've succeeded. Okay, so the truth is, I have a few more things that I'm excited to share with you, but I'm wondering if we should take a couple questions to figure out which direction to go in, because people may have very specific things on their mind. Is there anything we should talk about? What does the Rebbitzin say? What's
I'm just personally not sure the Rebbitzin. I have questions. Anyone else have questions? You guys want to?
Maybe if you ask something, I mean, it could be even just to help me get a sense of what are other.
What about kids that are very sensitive to criticism? So like what you were saying, we love you, and you're a great kid, and you can't hit, and so you need to take a break. For like some kids, even that's like overly, that's very hard for them. Certain kids, like, they'll take that moment to regroup, and certain kids, like, that will be like, it'll almost
Okay, so
even that, like, I don't know.
I understand what you mean. In other words, they're so sensitive. They feel like you just screamed at them.
Yeah, they'll say
like
you
you told them.
Yeah,
right.
You're always yelling at me. Like, I don't think I yelled at you.
Right. So there's a couple things. First of all, I want to say this, that It's very, very important to understand consequences or even criticism do not have to be immediate. They can be after 12 hours. The kid does not forget. So in other words, if a day later, when the kid is not feeling sensitive, sometimes there are kids who in the moment when they're upset, it's just they turn everything around and it's like, okay, so that's important. In other words, it's if the child is capable of understanding, I saw you were really frustrated and I understand that something got you really upset, but we still don't hit. So like that doesn't need to be explained to them necessarily in that moment when they feel everyone's attacking them and everyone's being. That's one thing to always keep in mind. That if you're upset or if you think they're not receptive, there's no reason why it can't happen 24 hours later. There's absolutely no reason. Even a consequence and a punishment can happen. There's no discussion of it. I'll say, you know what, like, I want to talk to you about this now. Yesterday that was so unacceptable that there's going to be this, if necessary. A second thing is like this. They say with little children, the worst thing you can ever say to them, not the worst, one thing you should never say is, see, I told you. So the kid is like climbing on one of these chairs, and you're like, don't climb it, it's going to fall over. And you look over and like, don't climb it. You tell them 4 times, and then they fall down and they smack their head and they're crying, oh, I hurt my head. You say, see, I told you. Did I tell you 4 times? So they say that's the worst idea. It's the worst idea. They know it. They learned their lesson better than when they touch the fire, which you told them not to touch, and they just learned a lesson better than anything else. That's what they say. So why do we say that? So a big reason we say that is because we feel terribly guilty. I just let my kid get hurt. So I'm saying, I told them not to. So you're talking to yourself. You're not really talking to the kid. At least for myself, that's oftentimes when I'm like tempted to say that, I have to remind myself that's not. So very important consideration now. This child didn't listen. Sometimes the consequence is enough that you don't need to say anything. And saying something, this child is sensitive because you're rubbing it in. So in other words, if one child is hitting another child and you take them by the hand, you separate them. And now the kid, but you don't understand what they did. I love you. Kiss them, hug them, nothing. It could be that enough. They're ashamed. They know what, it depends on the kid. Some children don't get it. There are kids who don't have, but others are very savvy. Oftentimes a sensitive person is 3 times as savvy, and they got it right away from the look on your face. They already feel terrible. It may not be necessary to do anything more or say anything in that moment. Anything that needs to be said can be said at a calm time or not at all. And then the consideration is like, how do we take this child and help them not feel too sensitive? Because being overly sensitive to the point that you really think if someone criticizes you, you're a bad person, is something that we need to build that muscle. And we need to think like what will give them more confidence. And sometimes that's something that's very important within a friend group. Sometimes there's a skill that people get. So when they get good at doing something, whether it's playing the piano or running, or a marathon or whatever the thing is, that's a very, very important thing. Just seeing success at something, all the things that would help a person build their self-esteem better and better. It cannot only be that the mother says, you're wonderful, even though that's a critical piece. It's the parents, it's not the only thing. And sometimes you'll be noticing from the way that they receive criticism that there's just a completely different thing to work on. So it may be that even if you don't criticize and you just do what I described, which was so mild, it still hurts them, then in that case it's a sign of this is a symptom, not the problem. And we don't need to solve this interaction. We need to try to get to the root of it and build up. Yes, Rabbi Glazer.
I found that oftentimes we're worried that if a kid does X, let's say, if visit those kids and they don't have the best Edos, my kid will end up having after-Edos. We do. A kid doesn't learn now, doesn't behave in class now, and he will just be a kid who doesn't behave.
Right.
Parents often have that tension. So,
right.
On one hand, it's a normal worry, because, on the other hand, it doesn't seem to be true. Right? How does one...
Okay, so that's why I say that long-term perspective is so fundamental, because the question is, let's say you have a little boy who's not enjoying, he doesn't want, his father says, come, let's learn Torah together. And the kid doesn't want to do that because it's Shabbos afternoon and all his friends are running around and he's going to have to sit down and learn. So then there's a book called The Heart of Parenting by Rabbi Moshe Dan Kestem. It's a short little book. There's some nice things in it. It's published by Torah Masorah. One of the things he says in there is he says he plays basketball with his children and he learns with his children. He says he knows one thing for sure. When he plays basketball with his sons, he's definitely doing a mitzvah. He says when he learns with them, he's not sure. He says because when you learn with your children, it may very well be that you're picking the wrong time and you're actually making them frustrated with learning right now. You don't know for sure. He says, when you play ball with them, he says, a parent and their children, the relationship that we develop, them knowing my father likes me, my father appreciates me, he enjoys my company, he cares about me, that relationship is going to be the single most powerful thing that a parent has to bring their child closer to God and Judaism. That's the big thing. So every time you strengthen that, every time you read a book and do a puzzle and do bedtime and give a hug and a kiss and you're doing chinuch and you're building them. So it's important to understand the following. When I talk about long-term perspective, something that comes up in my life is this. I have these beautiful teenage daughters who are filled with teenageness. And so they're fantastic. So I have 12 and 14 and 16. And that means that sometimes they just, scream at their mother because they're late for school, because they woke up 5 minutes later than they should have. And now someone else is in the bathroom because how many bathrooms can you have in a house? With, like at a certain point, someone else is going to use one or two. And they're so, they're so over the top. And it's like, what's going to be? So then my wife is like any normal, she's worried. She says, so I remind her, I tell her, anytime I tell her, anytime we talk to anybody else in the world, you were like that. She's one of 7 sisters. Every one of your sisters, like this is not crazy behavior. It's just a girl being a girl and being, emotional, excitable, and it's great, But she says, no, this is too much, So I said, okay, we're going to talk to. So I'll, in shul, I'll be giving a Pirkei Avos shiur on Shabbos afternoon. So there'll be, 20 women there. And I'll say, how many of you think that your daughter is just completely... It's okay, girl, but yours. And everybody's sort of sheepishly saying yeah, that's the problem. So what's a solution? Am I going to sit down with a 14-year-old and explain to them you really need to work on your midos and you need to deal with your anger management and your stress level in the morning? Is that going to be so effective? If we took 14-year-olds and sent them all to seminary, I was telling someone today, send them to seminary is very effective. People get introspective and they work on themselves. 18, 19 years old. If we did that with 13, 14-year-olds, sent them off, it wouldn't work because they're not at the age. Rashi, Maseches Kedushin, when talking about boys, says that between 16 and 18 is the earliest age that a young person can accept musar. Instruction of and I noticed this, teaching in a modern Orthodox high school, I would often get boys in 11th grade, that's 16, 17, and they look very different. The 11th graders look different. They're starting to grow beards, and they're independent, they're driving, and so the boys in 11th grade would often come to you with questions like this. They would say, I got into the bad habit of using my smartphone on Shabbos when I was in 8th grade, 9th grade, because I got the phones very young, and it's very, very addictive. I think it's many times worse than cocaine. I think really in terms of what it does to the brain. And so you get at a young age, and you get very addicted. And now Shabbos, Friday night, I wind up using my phone, and I'm very embarrassed. But that's what I do behind closed doors. And now I really don't want it. What can I do, Rabbi? I got that once, one version or another, that question tens of times from boys in 11th grade. I also taught 9th grade and 10th grade, and never once did I get that question from anybody because there's a certain age you get to where you've developed more and your conscience starts, and when you're younger, you're more happy-go-lucky, and such internal contradictions are not weighing on you in the same way. And not everyone had it at 16. There were plenty of kids who were just not ready for that conversation until they were 18, 19. With girls, the same thing. I don't know that the ages are identical. Bat mitzvah happens a year earlier. Maybe this happens a year earlier, but I don't have as much experience with that. They're not always ready for this. So what can I do? And here's the answer. I can raise my children with whatever I can do to give them the tools that when they decide to address this problem, they have every tool they need to do it. I can try to give them good self-esteem. I can try to give them a good sense of values. I can let them know that they're capable of putting their mind to things and doing it, that they're capable of delaying gratification. All kinds of things I can teach them when they're young, right, that are helpful. They're waiting 6 hours before they're going to eat, or whatever, right? They're learning a lot of skills, both from Torah and from the family, that will be very, very effective in when they realize that they're marrying somebody or they're married to somebody and they don't love the way that they react in certain stressful situations, right? Every time they're cooking for Shabbos and they're feeling stressed, they should react in that way. I don't want to react that way. Okay, well, now do you have the tools to handle that and to express that well and to ask your husband for the right kind of help and support? Or is it just a total emotional mess? you can build an enormous amount of things for the long term without immediately solving the problem, which actually are solving the problem. And that's always going to be the method. So if it's the right age for a child to be learning more and they're not learning as much, you need to think of ways to start making them love the process of learning and other things. And how can they do this? How can they do that? From every different angle, every question is going to be different. I'll tell you one more thing that's important too. Once I'm telling you about the teenagers, I'll just tell you one more important thing about that perspective. Do you ever have it where your child would never in a million years speak to anyone else in the whole world that way? Only you who gave birth to nearly died in labor, only you, right? You ever have this? You ever your mother give you that thing? Why is that? Why is that? So I'll tell you why. It's really obvious when you consider. We love our kids so much. Your child tells you, I hate you, drop dead, I never want to see you again. 10 minutes later, there's no consequence to that. Do you understand? We still love them like crazy. We're still there for them. You were still going to make them dinner. There's no consequence. It's I know you were just angry and just wanted bedtime, or maybe I'm even upset about it, but there's no consequence in the world. That is not, you say that to your friends, and everyone's going to look at you like you're bananas. You go into school and you start screaming like that at somebody because they stepped on your toe or because you're in a bad mood, and nobody will respect you. It will have major consequences in your life. At this stage in our children's lives, these kinds of behaviors, disrespect, actually have no meaningful consequence in relationships with us, as they should, because unconditionally, it doesn't make a difference what they say, we're going to love them like crazy anyway. So therefore, life is they have the capacity. They don't do this around their friends. They don't do this around others. This also means another thing, by the way, for your marriages. It means something very significant. If your spouse is able to complain to you, that's a healthy marriage. There are people who can't complain to their spouse. They can't show any of their bad midos ever. That's generally an abusive environment. It's an unhealthy environment for sure. So when I have a student in school who's wild and crazy, and then parent-teacher conferences come, and the parent's like they're a model kid at home, that's troubling. It should be the other way. It should be that whatever trouble they're in school, they're even more at home sometimes. Because at home you can walk around in your undershirt. You can show who you are. Everybody in this room is human. That means you have certain midos that are not yet perfect. That's what it means. You're not perfect. So where can you show those midos? And the answer is in your own territory, in your own place, your own home, if you feel comfortable. So a person who's in a marriage where their partner, where their spouse can show a side of themselves that is imperfect, it means that you've created for them a loving and accepting environment. That's what it means. Now, that doesn't get someone off the hook of trying to be a better person and not to, right? We have to all develop and try to be, but that's a very, very important thing to understand. If you're a good spouse, then it's your responsibility to accept my spouse isn't perfect yet, and I'm going to be the person that they're most comfortable to say something or to behave that way, because it all comes from their own insecurity. Anyway, it's their own weaknesses and their own bad midos, but they know that I made a commitment to them and I gambled my whole life on them and I love them enough to put up with, because everybody is a package. Everyone in the world, right, is a package, and you find the one that you can accept, but everybody has their amazing things, and everybody has their areas that are not as amazing. So this becomes a very, very significant perspective. I think another tremendous key to children's behavior is good shalom bayis. To the extent that a person invests in a good relationship with their spouse, to the extent that that is really loving and really very unbreakable and very healthy, then children feel safe and they feel secure and they act out less, and they're comfortable, and they can try to play us against each other. They ask one, they ask the other, they try to find all the faults and the weaknesses, and they'll push that. But in the end, really, I've seen parents where they stopped calling each other by their names. I don't mean tell daddy something. When you're communicating with the child, where these two people, when they become like Abba and Ima to each other, they're no longer romantic partners. They're just, you know what I'm saying? It's the least. That's not it. In other words, these two people should be very much in love with each other and very passionate about one another. And that is a basic basic part of what it means to raise our children in a healthy way. That they should come from a home where their father and mother really love each other and really get along and really have time for each other. It's so basic and fundamental in terms of every developmental study that's done, that children who come from strong homes like that, it's predictive as to whether or not they will have good marriages. What do they expect of a marriage? I just want to tell you one story that broke my heart, but it's not over. I was teaching some high school girls, and we learned something in the text about marriage, and Yitzchak loving Rivka, or something. It was like something in the text about marriage and a good marriage, and a girl raised her hand at the end of class after people had left. She's staying in her seat, and she says, "Rabbi, I don't think I want to get married." So I'm thinking like, okay, this is one of those complicated conversations. She says, because once you're married, your life is miserable. She says, you don't have any safe space, you don't have any personal thing, like everything is just, and I said to her this was a very sincere girl. I said, like I've seen marriages, many marriages, where people grow to love each other more and respect each other more and enjoy each other's company, and the home is a peaceful and happy place. And her eyes got big like saucers. And she says, are you lying to me, Rabbi Shoff? That was her response. She was not aware that such a thing exists in the world. And so how's that going to play out for her in life? Her parents and the couple of aunts and uncles and friends and whoever the 5 or 6 marriages she probably had any actual access to were terrible. And to her understanding, that's the nature of things. So it's very significant. What we show our children, besides for the fact that it's so good for their childhoods, it gives them a sense of safety and security. And by every single metric that exists out there, children staying with their parents in a happy home, if you can provide them a happy, healthy marriage, if you can do that, by every metric, whether they define themselves as happy as adults, whether their marriage will survive, whether they will go to college and graduate, whether like everything that a person might define as success, financial, emotional, spiritual, everything is extremely, extremely hinging upon that. So it's worth the attention, it's worth the energy, it's worth whatever it costs for the babysitter, for the date night, for whatever works for a couple to be able to just stay as a loving, attached couple in the right way. That's a very, very, very significant piece of parenting, parenting advice that I could not hold back. Okay, there's like 2 to 3 minutes left. What should we do for the last 2 or 3 minutes? What's the subject? What's the question? What's the topic? If I don't know anything about it, I'll say we're out of time. If I've read something about it, I'll... What do we say? Should we try to sum up? Okay, yeah, should we take one more question? I mean,
It looked like there was somebody who had a question.
Okay, so I'll...
But maybe not. Sorry, still patient.
Should I go ahead? Should we? What do you say?
I have a question. Before, at the very beginning, we were talking about the tendency to tell our children things that we don't really mean, like but we don't mean like for real. And I guess I'm not really sure what my question is, but where does this tendency come from? I'll speak for myself that we do this. We like order our kids around all the time. Like why do I don't know. Is that a question?
Yeah, it's a very smart question.
Resorting to that.
It may be different for different people. I'm not sure. It may be our way of expressing almost like wishful thinking. Like I want this to happen, and it's and some of it may also be laziness. Meaning, in reality, raising your children to help. There's a lot of things that it takes energy. It's like you want to give your kids a bath, they're not going to go running in the bath. So you're going to have to go like get between them and a screen, or you're going to have to like find some way to get their attention so that they heard you, or whatever book they're reading if they're one of those kids who just gets, or they're playing a game, and you're going to have to figure out, okay, are you ready to take a bath? Because I want to take you to the bath. Do you need to finish the page? Do you need to like what's going on? And then you're going to have to be patient for a minute. And then you're going to maybe have to take them by the hand it's a whole job. And it's like, why can't I just say, go get in the bath and they'll get in the bath? The answer is that's outrageous. Like that's not reasonable at that age. It will get easier the more that we do the full job with patience and with, so I think it's kind of that part of us in general that's that's kind of impatient, and we just want to get these things done. We have to realize, like, these are real tasks, and they take patience and energy and focus. They're also extremely rewarding things. In other words, ultimately, things like bedtime, when done correctly, and bath time and other things, if you're patient and you're not on your phone, you're not trying to do two other things at once, and you're just there with them, it's very sweet. I'll tell you that in those times, kids will talk. Kids will talk, and they will tell you everything about their life. And if you just ask them a question or some leading thing, and then you shut your mouth, you'll know the name of every kid in their class, and you'll know what's going on in their life, and you'll know everything else. And it's those times that are like, like they're a little bit mindless. They're just sitting in the bath, or they're, so sometimes they play with their siblings. That's also fine. It gives you 10 minutes apiece. But in general, those sort of tasks of like, I'm going to help you get ready for this because you need that, is very, very significant. And I think that, there's so much more. There's endless things to talk about. But I would just say that really the main thing is to take it seriously, to find things that are, to feel like you're growing. You're reading something, you're listening to something, you're connecting in some way. This is the most important thing that we'll ever do, is how we parent our children. There are people that really get a lot of joy out of their adult children. They just really enjoy their company, and it's a wonderful, wonderful investment in life that your children and grandchildren should look to you with respect and love, and have a good connection, and they make you proud, and they be loyal Jews, and pass along Jewish values, and every other thing that we aspire to. And it takes some attention. It's by far the best possible investment. And I said one last thing. I mean, I see that we're out of time, so I just tell you one final thing, and that has to do with, I thought twice about talking about this, but I think that's important to discuss for a second. The balance of once I'm talking about like our inherent laziness, a lot of times we're giving much too much technology because we're lazy. So in other words, you can really sleep late if you put on some cartoons or Uncle Maishi or whatever it is, and even if it's the most kosher material out there, and everything about it is just wonderful. First of all, it can come from laziness. Not always. Sometimes it's not laziness. Sometimes a person is at their absolute wit's end, and it's necessary for them to find some way to survive. But the problem is that developmentally, it's destroying. It's making mindless people. I'm not coming from a religious perspective when I say this. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be watching a lot of screens because the things on it are not religious enough, and they use the wrong words, and they have the wrong orientation towards marriage and love and everything else. Like, forget it. If everything that they were watching was kosher, it's mind-numbing, sitting there like this for hours, and it's addictive. And then it builds a whole different type of person when they become older, and they really can't sit. You know how when you have to look at like a long paper with tiny print, and it's like sign here, initial here, and you get fatigued just looking at that piece of paper because how could I read all this? A 30-page thing like that. So this is how children are feeling now when they're shown like a regular page in a book. You show them a regular page from the Hardy Boys or something, and they absolute fatigue, like you're looking at an Apple service contract that you have to sign. It's unbelievable because we've dumbed them down and we've just killed them. So it's a very, very significant thing for our children to be extremely mindful. Don't give them smartphones when they're too young. Don't do it. It's great. But I filtered it, and I this and I that. It's bad for them. It hurts them. It hurts their attention span. Their ability to enjoy life is different. So this is really a very, very significant consideration. I'm coming not from a religious perspective, but I want to tell you something. If in the religious world I had to become part of a Hasidic group, if that was the only choice, and I'm not Hasidic, I'm not, some of the communities, they have men and women walking on the different sides of the street or something, and like it's not how I would hope. I like to go for a walk with my wife, but I'm telling you that I would pick that faster than the alternative, if it meant that I have to just throw my kids in from such a young age. It's so alarming. It's something that needs a lot of attention and a lot of focus, and it's so easy to lose track of it. And I'm not saying because of what they'll be exposed to. That's an additional consideration that's very wise to realize, that you can get around every filter and you can get around every single thing. And if you don't have them on WhatsApp, there's Google Photos is the new WhatsApp. You understand? And there's chats. There's everything. There's a new way for everything. Through WhatsApp, people are able to get every movie that's ever made through Google Drive and every different thing. And there's 100 different ways that people can get access to everything. and your kids are a lot better at it. You did it to your parents. You figured out a way to watch TV all the time when they didn't want you to. You figured out 10 different tricks. Your kids are just as good at that, but now everything's available. So that's worth it. It's worth knowing. But that's less than the damage that's potentially being done. That's only as an aside. I know we're out of time. I thank you everybody so much. I'm sorry for going over time. I apologize for that. I got the sense that I could get away with it. Thank you so much for having me. It was really a pleasure, and may you all have wild and endless success with your beautiful children.